AI is one of those fundamental revolutions. I'm a big believer, but I know there will be a lot of harm. And I think that's the thing we should think about, what are the harm of AI and the harm caused by that. We've already spoken in the past about how much money is being stolen from the globe's economy around cyber in the 15, 16 trillion mark. Well, this is just going to accelerate that, because now the path to abuse you is much larger and faster. AI itself has fundamental challenges that have to be overcome. I'm bullish, but I know there'll be a lot of reconfiguring of what the value propositions are in our society in a lot of ways that are foundational.
Welcome to Keys to Real Estate. I'm so glad you're here because today's conversation sits right at the intersection of technology, risk, and the future of our industry. We're joined by Matt Lee, a cybersecurity expert who spends his time thinking about how systems break, and more importantly, how they're exploited. And what makes this conversation especially useful is that Matt doesn't just talk about bad actors. He explains why they act and the economic forces driving it all. And he should know. He allegedly used to hack into companies just like ours. Despite never having been arrested, Matt now coaches companies how to avoid becoming a target and a headline. So today we start at the macro level, AI, cybercrime, and the reality that the threat landscape is evolving faster than most businesses can keep up with. So if you've been wondering whether the current wave of AI is mostly hype or something more consequential, this will help answer that question too. It's not a fear-based conversation, but it is a clear-eyed one. So please enjoy my conversation with Mr. Matt Lee. The presenting sponsor for this season of Keys to Real Estate is First American Trust. First American Trust redefines banking for title and escrow companies. They offer innovative solutions that integrate banking functions directly into title and escrow software systems, enhancing operational efficiency and safeguarding financial transactions. At First American Trust, you have direct access to a personal relationship manager who delivers answers in real time. First American Trust is also recognized as an elite provider for the American Land Title Association. As a wholly owned subsidiary of First American Financial Corporation, they have roots in real estate tracing back over 135 years and is the only bank owned by a title company. With deep roots, advanced solutions, and a commitment to real relationships, they are setting a new standard for the industry. The future of banking for title and escrow starts with First American Trust. Visit firstamtrust.com to learn more. Matt Lee, welcome to Keys to Real Estate. We're so grateful to have you here.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, I want to start today with some big macro issues that everybody in our industry cares about. And we're hearing AI in everything now. I think there's AI going into my Rice Krispies. So on the general topic of AI, are you a doomer or an accelerationist or somewhere in the middle? I want to know where you stand and why you stand where you stand.
To coin my friend's comment from this weekend's Follies, I now have AI. All right, I apologize.
Well, you do have AI.
I digress.
That's awesome.
I digress. Okay, here's my thought on this. The Industrial Revolution left a lot of armless and legless humans named Stumpy. There's a lot of people that died at the hands of the Industrial Revolution in many different causations. But there's not a chance that anyone sitting here would go back and undo the Industrial Revolution and all the benefits. Like I can sit in my lounge chair drinking Pellegrino, right, because of the mechanisms and capabilities of the delivery around the world of mechanization of our globe. That's a reality. There's no chance we go back from that. Well, at least we don't want to, right? Go back to that. I mean, maybe there's a bit of nostalgic for the simpler times. But my point is, AI is one of those fundamental revolutions, I believe, that we are going to see so many things changed, but the outcome is probably better for humanity. As we go, I mean, think back a few hundred years ago when you died of typhus, and now we don't have those same challenges in the same way, present events notwithstanding. But the point being is, I'm a big believer, but I know there will be a lot of harm. And I think that's the thing we should think about is, what is the harm associated with this? What are the harm of AI and the harm caused by that? And it's a lot of forces. I won't get too nerdy, but like citizen development. There was never a time I could just sit down and say, I want this application, and then AI builds me an application that functions or doesn't function to some extent, right? Like that's such a cool part of our world. The risk, though, is now when you expose that, and we've already spoken about in the past about how much money is being stolen from the globe's economy around cyber in the 15, 16 trillion mark, right? Well, this is just going to accelerate that because now the path to abuse you is much larger and faster. There's a lot of people that aren't thinking about security, building stuff with AI. AI itself has fundamental challenges that have to be overcome. And one of the things that I'm going to talk about in a talk coming up for y'all is how processes can be abused for theft and for fraud. And now you're going to accelerate the exposure of your processes to me by a chatbot. Right? It's horrifying. So I'm bullish, but I know there'll be a lot of harm. I know there'll be a lot of reconfiguring of what the value propositions are in our society in a lot of ways that are foundational.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's so hard because the rush to keep up, that urgency is there. But also, what used to keep me up at night was I'd worried about how soon the quantum computing hackers could hack crypto and blockchain. And when we, as an industry that's looking about possibly putting a lot of their records out on the blockchain, I thought, well, that's what I used to lay awake afraid of at night. But now, since Anthropic's mythos, at least the myth around the mythos, which I thought was first hype when I heard it until I heard about a meeting that Secretary Bessent had with some leaders of our biggest banks. Jerome Powell was there. It was back on April 7th. And it was a closed door meeting talking about how Mythos apparently really is good at spotting these vulnerabilities. And they said, we're not releasing it. You can use this as a tool to go find your vulnerabilities. And so I would just love your thoughts on the entirety of all that, because now that's what has me huffing in a paper bag right now.
Gracious.
Although the product is being apparently offered to help find these vulnerabilities that are sitting inside these systems.
Gracious. This is deeply contextual.
Okay.
I'll set the stage. So for the audience, to try to de-nerd this a bit, and I'm glad I just got to find such a nerd to chat about this with. So when you think about the problem, I just talked about bug bounties and vulnerabilities, right? This is an already existing problem. To put it in perspective, if you were to drive on a bridge, and as a general consumer, you go to see this bridge, you're driving across this giant chasm, it's 1,000-foot drop, and you see a hole in the road deck. You see rust and disrepair. You see poorly designed edges. You see 2 more cars that have fallen through. You see 14 more holes as you go down. You see that it's getting less stable as you go. Then that is the software you drive on today. That's your bank software. That's the horrible real estate software you're using. And it comes from a theory of capitalism I call the middle theory, which is really just a restatement of saying that products don't typically rise much above or fall very much below the consuming entity's maturity. Most people as a consuming entity would have no way to tell whether or not the software they use is being kept up to date, has vulnerabilities being managed, has ways of dealing with tech debt, has ways of, because it's not incentivized. We don't ask for it. Nobody cares.
That's true.
So now you have a process where even up till today, last year, and we just saw the announcement a couple of days ago talking about the defunding of the CVSS or the inability for CVSS, which is an enrichment process. Again, we're such nerds. But one of the things that happened was a open organization called MITRE is the one that manages all these vulnerabilities. And back to my bridge analogy, we have about 30 to 50,000 vulnerabilities in software found every year. If that happened in road decks or in cars, economics would fix it. Because in cars, they must buy your car back or fix your car for millions of Americans. You don't have that problem in software. There is no recompense upon them. In fact, your EULA or your end user license agreement generally takes away all the liability from them even selling it to you. So now let's go back to Mythos. So now, in this already strained world where vulnerabilities are being found, they aren't being dealt with, there's horrible corruption in place in most of the CNAs, there's tons of challenges already existing. I'm doing a talk about this real soon. There's a panel on one. The problem is now you have like a already overburdened system that can't handle the space of what we have today being brought in with a lot of AI slop. There's lots and lots of people taking tools like Mythos, using tools like Behave Sex, Auto Pen Test. There's so many of them out there like this. This is just the one that's caught the news. But to use modalities of AI to find patterns in software. They made it for the lowest common bidder where nobody's mature enough to know it was written poorly. Nobody's mature enough to know they have vulnerabilities they're not managing because they'd rather get a new feature out the door so they can get 12 more signups so that economics will reward them in their capitalistic journey. Which I love capitalism. It's the worst system out there. Save all others, right? To steal that quote. And so the point I think is that now you dump an AI capability that is of pretty good order to do what humans could do if they focused enough. And right, if there was incentives for this. But now you have companies that could be receiving these vulnerabilities that already had no capability to patch them, already had no economic viability to fix the tech debt. They already had none of that able to be there. You're seeing public repos like FreeBSD and Linux have major kernel problems, and there's just not enough hands to even fix it. All right, to bring this back to the less nerdy part, I said this to a class I was just teaching about an hour ago that's the one they wanted to talk about is how is this different? I think long term, it's going to expose a lot of vulnerabilities. I think modalities like that, threat actors will absolutely use. I was speaking to a CISO of a very major VPN provider, and he asked this question, is how long do you think from proof of concept, that's when a researcher has said, I know this is vulnerable and you need to fix it, and it's now been released to the public, so that's all after vulnerability disclosure, but this proof of concept, so code that will destroy this world, this piece of application, is released, to total weaponization and total destruction of all assets that were still exposed and not patched. What do you think that time window is for this vendor? This was just a recent AI kind of fueled example of this.
8 months?
It was 48 hours from literal.
40?
Yeah. So when you start thinking about the asynchronicity of the warfighter trying to defend here in this case,
wow.
or the system protector trying to defend in this case, the speed of play is accelerating so fast. And so I think there's a challenge. But even as I say that, and I don't want to get too deep off on a whim, but when you think about the National Security Agency or other agencies that in the past maybe had incentivization to find a bug in software and then keep it to themselves so they could use it for espionage purposes. In the past, it didn't make sense for them to tell them because they wanted to use it. But what if now as a decision tree that every other actor also has the speed to figure this out just as fast as you do? Wouldn't that potentially shift the focus to telling about these vulnerabilities and patching them so they don't get weaponized against me, right? Because in the past you had this belief in superiority, or you had this belief in the ability to find it faster than others. And now that kind of goes away with these type of tools and systems. And Mythos is just the first of many that'll come at good pattern recognition and good rules application. The only reason we don't do this is we're not incentivized capitalistically to do this. Otherwise we would be, and we'd be doing it. Just like cars, since Ralph Nader's book in 1965, Safe at Any Speed, made the formation of NHTSA in 1966 and the National Motor Vehicle Safety Act. Yeah. I had a long form talk about this, if you can tell.
You just bring together so many of the elements that aren't talked about, including, by the way, that cybersecurity poverty line, because I wanted to go back and double click on that a minute, because so many of, especially in title and settlement, agents are small companies that are constantly in that 48-hour loop of threat. Somebody's always trying to get at them because they move millions of dollars of other people's money and data, very sensitive data. But the money's, obviously the first attraction. Yes, we're coming up with some great defensive tools to help block a lot of this. And you can go broke trying to spend money on them all to where you don't have a profitable business anymore. You have an interesting hobby, but that's about it. So it's that push me, pull you of nobody can afford all the defense they can buy. So finding that middle lane of the Goldilocks in an ever evolving threat world, it's just got a lot of people completely dizzy.
There's a little bit of hope, though. Again, I try to stay off the really nerdy, but it's hard for me. But there is a bit of hope in the sense that I've been saying to CISOs of pretty major companies that I believe SMB, the small to mid-sized business of the world, will surpass enterprise in the reduction of harm to those entities from cybersecurity incidents in the next 5 years. And that, again, the bold face, I see the bold face.
Say more,
You're knowing that's a bold statement.
Yeah.
But I have reasons for why. A number of factors exist. First, think back to your childhood home. In my childhood home, I had a drugstore about a 10-minute bicycle ride from me. There was also a card store next to it, ice cream store, and I think there was a toy store on the end, right? Now, close your eyes. How many of those companies still exist? None. Like none. So my point is that the SMB is ephemeral. Your business can go out of business and another title agency will spring up and another realtor will pop in the next week. Those are ephemeral. They can die and nobody cares. And I just mean that to say the only one that cares is the one that did go out of business and they're close friends. But every bicycle shop I've ever gone to eventually went out of business and another one sprung up. And so the first factor is that the SMB is ephemeral. So just know that it can come and go, and in our world, it's ephemeral. If you hear of Sears going out of business, Sears went out of business. If you hear of Netflix, or Blockbuster, you have it. But when you hear of Sal's Bakery or Billy's accountant, nobody cares. I don't mean that negatively. It's just in the grander scheme of things, not talked about. So that's the first factor. The second factor is that if I start a business today, there's almost zero chance I have legacy tech debt. I'm probably buying a Microsoft or a Google product that's cloud-centric. It has the ability to be managed through what's called an application programming interface or an API that lets me change it the way I want it and secure it. What that also means is that if I have every customer of mine that's now starting up in this very identity-centric, cloud-centric world without as much infrastructure, then I can script the same experience for every client, and I can set the same level of security for every client. And I'm being very summative, but intentionally so. But that means that I can get to a bell curve of capabilities in existence that's done by automation and by the same processes we talked about with AI. For some of those things they enable the RPA, robotic process automation, and non-deterministic outcomes. And so, like, short story is, I think that enterprise will almost always, for the next 10, 15, 20 years, exist and not die. They will continue to keep legacy tech debt around that has been around for too long, that has to be there because the ROI and return on investment is still there. And so they'll have complexities that a small business will not. And the ones that have those complexities don't have to survive, meaning that the next one that comes up will have the more modern approach to things. And the software companies are in that same light spectrum, right? The people you buy software from, if they don't adapt and change to this model, then they will be of that leftover variety. In the mid-market, which also is quite ephemeral, right? Lots of new companies start up for software in the mid-market. So anyways, my thought is that we will see your title companies and your real estate companies have better tools at a grander scale and a cost economy because of their simplicity by comparison to their enterprise counterparts. So,
and that's perfect. That's perfect to mention because that's sort of underway. The SaaS model was a little late coming to this industry for reasons.
True story.
But it's underway. It's beyond begun. It's really underway. So, however, I don't think a lot of buyers in the marketplace have necessarily updated their thinking, their approach, and I'm not sure about their understanding of SaaS. And you mentioned some of the great benefits of it. But I think if they're shopping for it like they used to legacy, that they might not be understanding what the deal is, and they might not be asking some right questions. So
that's a prescient statement.
How would you counsel people of how to come at those shopping experiences differently than they did enterprise?
So I'll give the cheeky answer first, and then I'll give the real answer.
Okay.
The cheeky answer is they shouldn't. They really should be partnering with a service provider that can ask those questions in a level of intelligence. When we talk about the technology, and I try to explain this, I literally just talked about this to a kid that was asking about how he talks to his customer who wants him to do something security he doesn't understand. I said, the challenge we have in our world is that we haven't quite regulated yet, right? Like, as a realtor, you have to go get a license. As a bartender or as a barber, you have to get a license. As me, I just say I'm me, right? And so you have this no barrier to entry challenge. But in every other professional industry that gets to a point where I have to start talking about methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus when I talk about how I deal with staph infections that happen to be resistant to methicillin-based methodologies gets complex, and we often make professional organizations to manage the access to being one of those and removing being one of those. If I want to be a doctor, it's the AMA, and if I want to stop being a doctor, it's a morbidity and mortality clinic that goes against my favor, all right? And so when we start talking about this, we haven't fixed that yet in our world. So it leaves us in a position where, for me to even ask the questions, there's a certain amount of knowledge I have to even understand the response, right? If I tried to say, well, why are we going to turn off IPv6 LLMNR failover? Well, LLMNR poisoning can be done as a technique with layer 2 access on an IPv4 or IPv6 network, causing a failback of, like, how much do you have to understand to even understand that statement? And for me to help you make an educated decision. That's why as a doctor, you don't, or as an attorney, you don't, or they don't explain case law that led them to their opinion and decision. They know that they can defend it. And I think that's the challenge we face. So for me, the answer would be, as a small to mid-sized business, it is not likely that you will be able to ask the right questions to be successful at determining how good they are. That said, I will give them, in my opinion, of what I would want to know. The first thing I was asking in that, and I'm glad you brought that SaaS conversion because it shows some nuance to your understanding of this. You've probably been doing this a minute. Or you just did great research. Either way, wonderful on you. But when you think about it, what was shipping software like in the past? Like you had a release and you needed to go to 1.1.4. Now you shipped it to me, and I put it in, I started installing it, and you don't know what systems I'm running or what servers I have, what drivers I have, what variables are there. And so what ends up happening is I have a problem. And so do 30% of the people you send it to, and then they call in for about 3 months and call in with all the problems, and then once that stuff gets all sorted, they get to another release. Their release capability is extremely slow, and the amount of cost to support is extremely high. But as you go to pure SaaS, one of the first questions I'd ask one of these old software companies as they're trying to be the new software company in SaaS is like, what's your go to SaaS strategy? Are you recoding? Are you writing it from the ground up? Or are you trying to port what you have out of this model? Are you scaling it with terminal servers? Or are you giving me traditional HTML5 access or Web3 access or any other type of HTML methodologies of design, which I can just use a browser? And so that'd be probably the first question is like, have they made a conversion of the old software to new to being pure SaaS in a traditional browser-based SaaS, no installed third-party model? That'd be the first thing. The second thing I'd want to know is, what's your vulnerability disclosure program look like? Tell me a little bit about your VDP. And what's interesting is with installed software, it was kind of basically gangbuster. If I found a problem in it and I could report it, like there was easy paths for me to get that tracked and reported. But with cloud software, they're typically their own CNA. They're typically their own authority on their own vulnerabilities. And so I would want them to explain to me, like, tell me a little bit about your vulnerability management. Like, do you pay people? Do you have a program? Tell me a little bit about your development cycles. The problem is each one of those questions are ones that you wouldn't know the answer to if you weren't in the space. And even myself, I have gaps where I don't know enough.
Right.
And so it's really trying to get a feel for that. In reality, I did a talk called MSPs Suck, but the world without them is worse. And it was a talk based on the economics of this problem and it's been held true. This was actually reinforced by an ENISA study of the NIS2 countries in Europe. And even in Europe and the United States, we spend about 4 to 7% of all top line revenue on tech. That's it. 4 to 7%. And if you take that there are about 14.9 million companies in the United States that have less than $500,000 in revenue, and they are the predominant category, I can do the math of 7 times 5 is 35,000 a year to spend on all tech. That includes that resware, that includes the softwares you're going to use. I don't want to just name one, but that includes all of it. Laptop, the mouse, the keyboard, the internet service, all of it. How are you ever going to hire somebody intelligent enough in your organization to solve this problem and answer these questions at a systemic level? You could pay for like half a kid named Chuck, right? Like maybe.
Right.
So like, you have these challenging issues where outsourcing to an MSP is probably the right answer. Finding the right MSP is an additional challenge. But if you can find the right MSP, they can ask these questions of your vendors and help you guide towards a better vendor experience, better vendor products. That would be my non-quippy answer, is that you probably shouldn't. It should be somebody else helping you. And potentially that may be things that you do in your world where you're giving guidance to people or doing some of these research. That's another systemic function that helps, right? Trade organizations or trade research or things like that are very valuable because they understand the nuances of the business.
Well, and I thought that you perfectly illustrated that there are questions that should be asked that aren't being asked today, that buyers, business owners, decision makers don't even know to ask, let alone would recognize a good or a bad answer when they got it back. Yeah. And it makes it hard.
That's why we develop professional organizations.
Right.
That's why we as a human species understand verticalization and specialization and these types of things, right? It's just we haven't got there yet. In that talk I posit that we as humans do this over about 100 to 140 year time period. If you look at the first car was invented in 1897. We didn't have a single safety feature filed for a patent until 1950 with the seatbelt. It wasn't until Ralph Nader in 1965 writes the book Unsafe at Any Speed, talking about how the car industry just made stuff because people wanted it. Does that sound familiar to software? It kind of does, right? With no consideration of that spike on the dash is bad for humans. But the point is, when you look at technology, we invented the first digital computer in 1925. We didn't have a single national cybersecurity strategy until 2013, 2018, and 21. We didn't form CISA until 2018. So we've had no guidance as a country on this because capitalism does typically correct. I mean, down the road, capitalism corrects. We just haven't made it through that 120-year period yet. We're close. I don't know what AI does to it, and nor can I say we've ever had a technology that moved as fast as this technology does.
Right.
Like between the invention of a steam engine and James Watt improving it was 100 years. I mean, just in a steam engine capacitance, or maybe I'm misspeaking, but we don't have the speed of acceleration that we have in this world.
Right. And I get asked about twice a week, this AI stuff, is it mostly hype or mostly real? And I'm like, there's some hype, but it's mostly real.
Yeah, it's
and,
both,
you know,
right?
When you start having conversations with technologists that are working in this and they arrive to your conversation like this, holy hell.
Yeah.
Like, they're not that good at actors. Like, it's really.
I'm glad you brought that up. I was doing a talk last October called "Giving Swords to Our Future AI Overlords," positing that MCP was a real bad egg. But the point was, I was going to a couple of AI talks beforehand, just as imposter syndrome one does. And so I'm like, okay, where are we at? And so I went to a GERCon, which is a hacker conference in Grand Rapids. And there was a talk about AI and the risks of AI. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm going to see where I'm at now. And it was wild because I remember walking away going, how are these practitioners this far behind? How are they fascinated by the ability to run Olama? Like, I've been running Olama now for 5 years or whatever it's been at this point, 23, whatever, 3 years now. But that is the speed of speed to that point of it. It's faster and faster because of this, right? And so I was perplexed by the lack of knowledge in that space, even though so many of them are in my space. And I don't mean that to be aggrandizing. I just mean it's moving so fast that if you're not in the very second of it, you're miles or years behind, even in months.
Amen. Well, thanks. That's why we wanted to have this conversation today. We just at a point in time in the latter part of April of the year of our Lord 2026, sort of from somebody who does keep up on all this is where we are today. And so thanks for that look at some of the macro issues. And if it's okay, what I'd like to do is come back next week and kind of drill it down into the micro a little bit.
Absolutely.
More about what's going on in shops and business cycles and look at it through that lens if we could.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining today, Matt. Well, that was Matt Lee helping us zoom out and take a look at the bigger picture. But if you want to go deeper on this topic, Matt will be speaking later this month at NS3, the National Settlement Services Summit. It's one thing to talk about these risks and opportunities in theory, but it's another to watch someone walk through exactly how they would exploit them. You can catch Matt's session called How I Would Hack Your Title Agency Wednesday morning on NS3's main stage. If you'd like to join us, you still can. Information about NS3 is linked in today's show notes. Now, in our next episode here, we're going to bring this down from the macro to the micro, into the day-to-day realities inside title and settlement companies. What actually creates risk in your workflows? Where are vulnerabilities hiding in plain sight? Because understanding the big picture is helpful, but knowing where it shows up in your business is where this really starts to hit home. So thanks for joining us today, and I'll see you back next time.